All right, good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to spotlight our interpreter. Oh, I'm sorry. My mistake, Maria. You are already spotlit. Sorry, folks. Good morning and welcome to day 3 of face-to-face virtual programming. We are so excited to have you all here. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our disco this morning. These are the good times indeed. Welcome, folks. I am just pulling up my notes. So this session is Poetry as Portal, teaching Muslim-rooted art and poetry as a force for illuminating culture. We are so glad that you could join us for this morning. My name is Kinsey Keck. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with brown hair. It's half pulled up in a ponytail today. It's just a bit past my shoulders, and I have bangs as well. I'm wearing some rose gold wire framed glasses that are large and round. I'm also wearing a white button-up V-neck shirt with frilly, what are these called? Sleeves. And my background is currently blurred, but I'm sitting in my kitchen in Washington Heights, tuning in with you all. I'm also the programming and membership manager for the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. For those who don't know, the Roundtable is a grassroots service organization that works to improve and advance the state of arts education through professional development workshops, advocacy, and online resources and platforms to connect us all, the arts education field. Although we are currently meeting via an online platform, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we work and live on unceded lands. Mannahatta, or the place that is widely known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. We would like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and immigrant communities to which have helped build the city that we know today. As we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, we would like to uplift a couple of contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that we can all learn from. So I'll paste those in the chat. If you haven't had a chance yet, please do take a look at what we've pasted in the chat, save the links for later, learn more about these organizations, support them with donations if you can. And please also feel free to share in the chat any organizations or work that you would like to highlight with those on the call today. Thank you. I also want to take a moment to thank our Face-to-Face 2023 conference sponsors. There are so many of them, and we are very, very grateful to all of them for their support of this milestone conference, being our 30th Face-to-Face at the Roundtable. Today's session is specifically brought to you by 92NY's Dance Education Laboratory, also known as DEL. We are also grateful to Arts Connection for bringing this session today, and VLA, which is Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts in New York. So thank you to all 3 of these amazing sponsors. If you'd like to learn more about them or any of our other sponsors, you can visit the Face-to-Face website. Just a few more reminders. If you're having any trouble with Zoom at all, please feel free to send me or my colleague, Alex Latore, a private message. We're here to help. Please do keep your mic setting on mute since this is a meeting so that we can hear everyone clearly. We encourage you to use the chat to ask questions and connect with other folks on the call. As you can see, this meeting includes live ASL interpretation. We also have automatic closed captioning available via Zoom. To activate your captions, just check your toolbar. You should see a CC button that says closed captions on it. You can click that and click show captions. That may also live under the more ... button on your toolbar. And last, I want to just share that this session is being recorded and it will be made available to registrants within probably a week of today's live event. And now it's time for me to turn it over to our amazing facilitators today. We're very excited to have them, so please join me in welcoming them. We have Sahar Muradi, Director of Education Programs at City Lore. We're also welcoming Andrea Skafish Beater. Andrea is an IB World Religions and History teacher at the Brooklyn Latin School. And lastly, we have Danielle Black. Danielle is a teacher of AP Literature and Composition, Expository Reading and Writing, and Drama at Vacaville Christian High School. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to get you a spotlight now, and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsey. Salam, hello and welcome. Ramadan Mubarak to everyone observing. Thank you again, Kinsey, Alex, and our interpreters, Maria and Hijra, and as well the entire roundtable for organizing this incredible conference. I hope everyone's had a chance to sit in on several sessions. Again, my name is Sahar Muradi. I use she, her pronouns. I have light brown skin with dark hair pulled into a bun. I'm wearing a black top with a scoop neck and gold earrings with the Arabic letter, which you can't see. It's the Arabic letter wow, and also the word and that's very consciously put on. I like to live in the and I do direct the education programs at City Lore. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the program, and then we'll move further into the program. So at City Lore, we work in the service of cultural equity, meaning we work with various cultural and linguistic communities and tradition bearers to help them preserve, present, and advocate for their arts and art practices. And in my specific work in education, we work closely with culturally rooted artists. So artists who are coming out of a particular cultural tradition in every discipline, from music to dance to theater to literary arts. And we collaborate so that they can share their work with young people in schools, as well as people of all ages in community settings. And maybe we can share the City Lore website in the chat, Kinsey. Thank you. So City Lore and I are based in Lower Manhattan, in the Lower East Side, East Village area of New York City, which is the homeland of the Lenape, and New York City is home to one of the largest urban Native American and indigenous populations in the world. And I also just want to recognize the limitations of only saying that and then moving on. And I really appreciate how the roundtable makes a very conscious effort to also remind us that there are ways of moving beyond just statements, but educating ourselves and also connecting with, or educating ourselves and also supporting organizations, indigenous organizations, and uplifting Black and Brown and immigrant voices. But I wanted to recognize the importance, I think, and significance of reinscribing space with its history, its dignity, and also deference to all those who have resisted and continue to resist forces of oppression, displacement, and cultural erasure. And I really feel a strong way of doing that is through the arts. And I think that's what has brought us all here to this moment together. So thank you so much, every single person, for being here and being rooted where you are with me and with each other this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. So let's jump in. The program for today is that I'll start by sharing a little bit on the background and context of my work with Danielle and Andrea. And then Andrea will share her experiences of teaching a whole unit on different elements of Muslim-rooted arts, followed by Danielle, who will look closely at a couple of lessons on poetry and literary analysis. Unfortunately, our friend and colleague Teresa Lamb is not able to join us today due to a personal situation. that came up at the last minute. But that may allow us to have a little more time for conversation and also for poetry making at the end. So yeah, after the presentations, we'll have a conversation, which I'll kick off with a couple of questions and then open it up to the room. And then I hope that we'll have the last 20 to 30 minutes to look at the subversive and radical qualities of the 7th century poetic form, the ghazal, and we'll make one together. So Kinsey will help monitor. Kinsey and Alex, thank you for monitoring the chat. And I ask folks to try to hold your questions to the conversation part so we don't miss it. But of course, if anything comes up and you have a response to the presentation, reaction, we'd love that. So feel free to share some emojis or other reactions in the chat. All right. So to start, I'm just gonna screen share if you give me one moment. Here we are. So every year for the past 4 summers, or every other year since 2014, City Lore has received support from the National Endowment for the Humanities to host a summer institute for classroom educators, K through 12 educators from across the country. And this institute is called A Reverence for Words, Understanding Muslim Culture Through the Arts. And I've co-directed the institute with my colleague, Amanda Dargan, since 2016. And basically it brings together these educators to explore the history and social and political fabric of a variety of Muslim societies and cultures through an examination of their poetry, music, dance, and visual arts through lectures, workshops, and field trips. And right now we're on the website of the most recent institute, which was the 2021 institute that happened to be virtual since we were in the height of the pandemic. And both Andrea and Danielle were participants in that virtual institute. And I'm gonna, I'd like to just sort of convey the depth and the richness of what we studied, and not just sort of anecdotally as like a reflection, but also to share what is possible to do as educators, whether you have direct physical access or you are remote, or you're far from the material that you want to explore. So here are some images from some of the things that we did. These are from the in-person years, but we also did some of this virtually. So on the top left, you see an image of someone standing in front of a mihrab or a niche from a masjid at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so we did a tour led by the curator of the Islamic art collection at the Metropolitan Museum. And that's something that is available to educators anywhere because the Met has an extensive online collection of artwork, which we're going to visit a little bit later through Andrea's presentation, and several other museums around the world that have large Islamic art collections offer tours, virtual tours, and access to their collections. We also, during the day, we would have lectures by academic experts as well as community leaders. So on the top right here, you see an image of the educators visiting the Islamic Cultural Center in New York. And we are speaking with Imam Jallo there. During the day, we also spoke with scholars from universities on things ranging from, the Rumi and Hafiz's poetry to looking at Arabic music traditions, to the connection between the blues and the call to prayer, which is fascinating. We also had field trips. So we visited here at the top now, you see on the right, images of Untermeyer Park and Gardens in Yonkers, New York. It's an Indo-Persian inspired garden. And we were looking at the architecture of the garden and the elements that make a Persian garden. Some of those are Islamic elements or inspired by Islam, and a lot of them are pre-Islamic elements like air, fire, soil, water. And after our visit, we had a workshop with one of City Lore's teaching artists, Haifa bin Khadi, on it was a watercolor workshop where we designed our own Persian gardens inspired by these elements. So Untermeyer, we weren't able to visit in 2021, but again, we did a virtual tour and we were able to do a workshop online. Other workshops were Arabic calligraphy. We also, here on the left, you see one of the educators throwing their head back, laughing in a gathering where we had a poetry duel called Beit Bazi, which is a subcontinental South Asian tradition of similar to a slam, if you will, but it's an improvisation. Well, we played it improvisationally here, where you go back and forth between two teams competing through poetry. So anyway, there's several other things that we did across the 2 weeks, including having concerts, going on a Harlem history, a Muslim tour of Harlem, a walking tour, as well as poetry readings by Muslim identifying poets who also identify, who have a multiplicity of identities, who might identify as queer and Muslim, or may identify as immigrant and Muslim, and other identities. So just again, to sort of expand what we mean by Muslim and Islam. So I'm just going to pull out of this for a second. All right. So the Institute concluded with an opportunity for every educator to then create a lesson or a unit plan based on the content that they were exposed to, something that they could bring back to their schools and communities. And it was really supposed to be responsive to their students and also, speaking to their particular content and grade level. The goals of the Institute and what I think have informed the work that Danielle and Andrea have done are, one, that we were there to recognize the intrinsic value of arts of Muslim cultures, that we weren't there studying arts because they are by Muslims or about Islam per se, but because they are great works of art and literature in their own right. We studied The Conference of the Birds, which happens to be one of the greatest epic poems of all time that maybe has not been studied or exposed enough in mainstream America. Like we were there to increase access and appreciate these works in their own right. And maybe, Kinsey, these are the goals that maybe you can drop in the chat. The second goal was to challenge the stereotype assumption that there is a single monolithic understanding or practice of Islam or a single representation of Muslims or Muslim culture. So, we started the Institute by with a reading where the author says, I invited a few friends over to dinner at my place. He's an academic, Sorab, and they started the evening with some wine, and one of the non-Muslim friends at the table said, "How are you having wine if you're Muslim?" And he said, "Oh, you don't know anything about Islam, if that's your question." So, just again, like sort of challenging assumptions and stereotypes, interrogating what we even mean when we talk about art of Muslim cultures. So by Muslim, are we talking about art by Muslims? Are we talking about art made by non-Muslims about Islam? Are we talking about art about Islam? Or is it influenced by Islam or Muslims? So how come we don't say art of Christian cultures, or an art by a Christian person, or a Jewish person? So again, challenging our own vocabulary and nomenclature. And then fourth, our goal was to demonstrate the depth and complexity and integral role that the arts have played within Islam and Muslim cultures, and how those arts have both influenced and are in confluence with other cultures and arts. So really just getting at depth and complexity and trying to make connections between arts and artists. And then lastly, because City Lore is rooted in folklore, the organization was founded by a folklorist. Our own arts education pedagogy is based in integrating tools from folklore. So that might include the use of personal narratives or objects or interviews as tools for studying arts, culture, and history. And we'll hear a little bit about how the educators use that today. So that's what we hope for the educators, that they would be bringing back to their communities a more complicated understanding of Islam, Muslim art. So let's find out how they actually condensed all this rich material into something compelling, engaging, and relevant for their students. So we'll hear from Andrea first. I'll just get your presentation set up, Andrea, if you'd like to introduce yourself once more.
Thank you so much, Sahar, and thank you to everyone for being here. I feel honored to be here and to share my experiences. Sahar, you just brought back so many memories from the 2021 Virtual Institute, so thank you for that. As stated before, I am a world religions and history teacher at the Brooklyn Latin School. I should state my pronouns are she, her. I have white skin and light brown, dark blonde hair, and I'm wearing a sort of ruffly brownish top. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, from the ancestral land of the Canarsie and Lenape people. I am in a tiny sort of closet-sized office of my assistant principal. I want to take a moment to thank my school for their endless support for exploring and trying new ideas, and my wonderful students whose work you will see featured in the upcoming slides. So with what Sahar shared, I was reminded of how my goal was to turnkey the experiences that I had in the Institute and share as many of those with my students as I possibly could. I started with a unit called Exploring Islamic Arts and Culture, and I framed it as a portfolio project. My classroom setting is an 11th grade International Baccalaureate, or IB, World Religions class in a public high school. So I had the benefit of having it as an elective class, not feeling as bound by specific state standards. But there are standards for the IB that we had to meet as well. So I did need to balance those. The elective class has 33 extremely diverse students, diverse racially, ethnically, socioeconomically, and religiously. And as an educator, they are also diverse in terms of their academic needs. The unit was in May of 2022, after studying the key tenets of Islam. Students had spent previously in the year, had studied the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's a 2-year course of study. So then the following year, they study Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. And the focus of the class is to learn about and celebrate differences in religions and in lived religious experiences. And then, as I mentioned, students take a rigorous IB exam at the end of their senior year. So the next few slides, I'll show some excerpts from student work, also some excerpts from the unit and how I framed the lessons in order to get to and accomplish that work. I welcomed the students first to the portfolio project, and of course went over the expectations and grading, especially because this was a different type of unit than I normally have taught. So I asked students to participate in the activities each day. I limited the homework or had no homework during this time. I asked them to really show up and complete products as detailed in the slides. Products ranged from sketches to interviews to calligraphy and poetry. Students were then asked to select 4 of their products to serve as an answer to the question, how do the products selected represent your journey exploring the diversity of Islamic arts and culture? Students were then asked to curate their product choices with an introduction and context for each one, along with an overall narrative reflection. I also shared that the goals, I was very intentional and explicit with my goals, that they were to recognize the intrinsic value of the arts of Muslim cultures and to challenge monolithic ideas about Islam and Muslims. I should share that my school is roughly about a third Muslim, students identifying as Islam being their religion, their faith background, from countries including West Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and many who were born right here in New York City. Despite my students having friends and classmates who are Muslims, there is still this very simple notion of what it means to be a Muslim. I pray 5 times a day. I follow the tenets. I adhere to Ramadan, don't eat pork. It's very simplistic. And my goal was to, with this new set of knowledge from the Institute, from City Lore, to share all of that with my students, to break down assumptions, to bring in the complexity. I shared with my students that I wanted them to be vulnerable each day, to show up and try things that are way outside of their comfort zone, just as I did when I participated in the Institute, and just as I was doing when I was teaching these lessons. I'm trained as a social studies teacher, so history and world religions, but not as an arts educator. So bringing in these arts was a tool or a vehicle to get to these understandings, but definitely outside of my comfort zone. For everyone who was teaching last year, you probably know that it was one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging year in memory for teachers and for students. Coming back from remote learning, the challenges of being present in a classroom together, and what that means for all of us was something I really had to face head on. So I wanted this unit to be about joy, about understanding, about exposure. I wanted my students to enjoy their unit and their time together and to be really present in the classroom. Instead of an in-depth study, which is how the other religions that I teach are approached, this unit was about exposure to the different Muslim-rooted arts. We traveled throughout different time periods and throughout different present-day countries in order to learn about these arts. So I'll share some of the highlights from the unit now with some student work. So we started with identity interviews. This, of course, works in a variety of settings, whether you're talking about Muslim-rooted arts, of course, or not. So students were asked to pair up, prepare interview questions, conduct interviews for 4 minutes, and to create a mini book. So the goal was to have something that they could give to their partner after engaging in the interview. And I'm sure that this explanation, these logistics seem simple. I just want to share that with just a few simple guidelines, that it was really effective to have students share with one another. I also framed it with the really wonderful quote up at the top from poet historian who shared with us in the Institute, Kewale Kamara. When you talk about yourself, you come to know yourself. When I participated in the Institute, I was struck by her wonderful interview. I pulled out and extracted that particular phrase and translated it into the Arabic that you see there. Looking at the next product, students read a Met Museum here in New York curatorial essay and experimented with geometric patterns in Islamic art. If I have access, yes, to the chat, I'll just drop in If you don't mind going just back one more. Oh, no, this is the, yeah, thank you. I'm just going to add the link to the Met publication that I used. It's free, available for everyone. Works, I think, for a wide range of ages and purposes. And students had little images throughout to look through to see where geometry appeared in Islamic art. And then they had an opportunity to create their own. In the picture of the students in my classroom, you can see that's what they're hard at work doing, but I was not able to save any of their actual work. I should add that worked really well because, as many of you may know, teaching in a public school in New York City, space is at a premium, and I share my classroom with a math teacher. So I had compasses and rulers on hand that made the geometry even more successful. We then explored virtual galleries of Islamic art. I suggested a few, including the Met Museum, the Detroit Museum of Art, the Egyptian Museum of Art, but there are many others that have terrific virtual galleries. I asked students to select a piece of art, write a short phrase about it, describing what they saw, and then to sketch just one specific part of this. I am personally somebody who has a lot of anxiety around drawing, despite asking my own students to draw. This was an activity that we did in the Institute, and engaging in it myself and drawing a small section of a larger, beautiful piece of art, it certainly increased my confidence and my joy in creating art. We have one featured on the next page. This is the tugra, or insignia, like signature of the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who reigned in the mid-1500s CE. This is from Istanbul, Turkey, as he was a part of the Ottoman Empire. The next product was one of my favorites. It was to first look at this piece of art, which is a 10th century vessel or piece of earthenware from Iran. And it has the inscription on it, "Planning before work protects you from regret." And I think this really speaks to what Sahar was mentioning earlier of what does it mean to be a piece of Muslim art or a Muslim-rooted art. So many of us see Islamic art as being connected to the religion or about the religion. And this is just a very helpful proverb, having nothing to do directly with the religion of Islam. So I asked students first to explore translating into Arabic. So there was a short video tutorial on how certain strokes to write Arabic in calligraphy. And we had some calligraphy pens. Sharpies also work really well, again, when resources are at a premium. And I had also asked students to reflect, to extract a specific short phrase, and then to translate that phrase into Arabic, taking their phones out, using Google Translate. And then I asked them to create their own earthenware bowl, which you'll see on the next page, to transcribe their sentence around the bowl into Arabic. And I really love this. From my student Finn, Islamic art enhances the beauty of the religion. So this was at sort of a midway point through the unit, as students were reflecting on what they had learned so far. And I couldn't have asked for a better phrase for a student to share and transcribe around their bowl. As Sahar mentioned, we read excerpts from The Conference of the Birds by Attar, Farid Undin Attar, a 12th century Iranian poet or Persian poet. My students read the Iliad, they read the Odyssey, they read these great epic poems, and so many have never heard of the Conference of the Birds. So this was only excerpts, and it was for the purpose, again, of exposure to sort of challenge what we envision when we see or when we think about an epic poem. There are many different themes that come up from the Conference of the Birds. So based on the excerpt that each group got, I asked them to then create their own cover art. That was just with sort of, as I was working through each day's lessons, looking at the different translations for the Conference of the Birds, I was so struck by the beauty of the cover art. I couldn't decide which one to use, so I asked the students to create their own, and which one would best represent the themes that they were reading. The next one is a reading of ghazals, and then a rewording of a translation of a ghazal into poetry. Students also then created a group or individual ghazal. That last point is one to note, that with a unit like this, when I wanted students to feel really comfortable, to really enjoy creating, they had options of whether they wanted to work in groups, in pairs, individually, however they felt most comfortable in creating. So this is, this ghazal here is a translation of Sab Kahan, which was written by Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib, who is a 19th century Mughal Empire poet, translated from the Urdu. So students were already given a translation, sort of a rough word for word, what each word in Urdu then translated to in English. So it was then my students' job to work to bring it to life as poetry. We'll be spending a bit more time with ghazals with both Danielle and Sahar. But one of the things to note, or a couple of things to note, the author is sometimes just known as Ghalib, and you can see he is referencing then himself with the final line that is included here. He will also talk about wine in this particular poem. And the phrase daughters of beer is used, which is a reference to the constellation Ursa Major. So we weren't as focused on the rhyme scheme as much as just sort of bringing to life these words into poetry, adding articles, maybe moving a few things around where appropriate to turn it into something quite beautiful in English. So I'll read that now. I'm just going to bring myself a little closer to it. A translation of Ghazal Sab Kahan. All in this place, some tulips and roses became manifested in dust. What hidden aspects will become remembered? Were party adornings too colorful to us? But now they become niche adornments of forgetfulness. Hidden at night were daughters of beer, of sphere. What became of their mind? Even if I go there, that one's insults become remembered. A cup of wine became life-enhancing, to whose hand it's in. All lines vain of life, as if it became the hand of wine. We are monotheists. Our pursuit is in the rejection of customs. Man becomes habituated with grief, then grief becomes erased. If Ghalib keeps weeping like this, then, oh, people of the world, look at these desolate towns you became. And the final product that I want to highlight today was an activity called a multisensory interview. Again, framed by the really powerful phrase, when you talk about yourself, you come to know yourself. I asked a student volunteer to present about Islam in his life, or I guess the student volunteered even before we got to this point. Presenting about religious life in my classes is really a big feature of it in whatever religion we're studying. And I have the tremendous benefit of having a very religiously diverse class. So a student, Abdoulaye Diallo, was happy to present and to engage specifically in this multisensory interview activity. Because he's the one presenting, I wanted the other students then to take a very active role. So they were divided into different roles based on their interests, based on what they saw as their own strengths. And this came directly from an activity that we did in the Institute. Some were scribes, meaning that they wrote in quite a bit of detail at the beginning, middle, and end of the interview. Others were interviewers with questions, and then very actively writing follow-up questions. Some were setting artists, or object artists, or character artists. And I should add, I didn't include these, but Abdullah shared many pictures from his life, the role of Islam in his life, both here in New York City, in Harlem, and also in Guinea, in Western Africa. All of these then contributed to a class book that we laminated. We chose highlights from, let me see if I can do this. We chose highlights and turned it into a book that we presented to Abdullah, which is on loan for me right now for this presentation, that I will happily return to him. So the students are such incredible artists. If you'll just go back once more, just so we can take in this, this is the front and the back covers that you see here, done beautifully. I accept Islam, it's who I am. And we see Abdullah pictured here, his name in Arabic, looking on at the Kaaba as a part of religious pilgrimage, the most sacred place in Islam. And I'll just move us on to a few more of the highlights from the book. Again, just my students are such talented artists. We see his clothing during prayer. He came dressed in traditional religious clothing, the keffiyeh. An object artist chose to draw a stack of Qur'ans that were in the masjid or mosque of his family's mosque in Guinea. And then the writers, the interview questions, a student asking a question about being barefoot when entering the mosque, having noted that there was a rack for shoes, looking down at the bottom, do prayers during Ramadan change? Do prayers during Ramadan change? Yes, they do. So just being ready to answer additional questions, to ask additional questions. Other people extracting key phrases, key details that are shared. And then some really powerful statements, I want to do it. And then finally moving on to the last slide of highlights, I have to do it. And again, we see the Kaaba featured there, And he was sharing that he was born into Islam, with Fulani being his family's language. Thank you for the kind words in the chat. And I will just wrap up with the last slide to say thank you so much for this. I feel really honored and humbled to get to share. This project meant a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was so compelling and rich. And yeah, your students' artwork and their contributions were beautiful. I'm going to get us set up for Danielle's presentation. And Danielle, while I do that, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, so I am Danielle Black. I work, I'm a teacher at Vacaville Christian High School. I teach a variety of classes. My English classes, but I also have drama, I have digital photography and yearbook productions. But the lessons that I'm going to be talking about today are specifically from my English classes. So I have 12th grade English. At our school, we offer 2 different courses. One of them is expository reading and writing course, which is a college preparatory course for 12th graders. And it's considered our core class, but I always tell the students there's not really an easy English class to take during 12th grade year. They focus on nonfiction texts and rhetorical analysis, developing rhetoric, understanding rhetorical situation. The AP Literature and Composition class is a focus on fiction texts. So we cycle through units of short stories, poetry, and longer fiction, novels, and dramas. The population at my school, the majority of our students are white and upper income households. Majority of them identify as Christian. But of course, like, we welcome students from a variety of backgrounds. Academically, our students are very diverse. So within my two classes, I have a wide range of abilities within those two classes. Oh, and I'm in California. So I just want to point that out. It is currently 7:46 where I am, 7:46 a.m. And so I wanted to point out that anytime I do a new unit, I always focus on the standards. Being an English class, I have to make sure that I am meeting the expectations of ERWC and AP Literature and Composition. So I wanted to kind of like condense both of those because they have unique standards for each class, but there's some similarities between the two. So overall, the goals of the class are for students to read and analyze texts, to understand the speaker's or author's perspective and develop ideas of their own, to write literary and rhetorical analysis of texts, to write strong arguments using logical structure, strong diction, awareness of the rhetorical situation, and use of a variety of rhetorical and literary devices. And then my personal goals are always to help the students develop empathy. And I do this by providing them with multiple works of literature from authors of diverse backgrounds. And another goal is for them to have a deeper understanding of their own ideas.
What's the MX offer you got on coffee?
I think
When you have time, just let me know.
Okay, so sorry, that just kind of threw me off a little bit. So the other goal that I have is for them to develop a deeper understanding of their own ideas, in some ways reinforcing what they already believe, maybe finding new information that supports that, but also being very open-minded. I want them to question their own beliefs and change some of their views as they encounter new information. So through the City Lore summer program that I did, we were able to read work from one of the featured artists, Sadiq Zukoji. So Sadiq Zukoji is a professor at the Mississippi State University. He is also a Nigerian poet and has some amazing work that I encourage you to explore outside of this. The work that we pull from is from his book of poetry called Your Crib, My Qibla. So what I do because this is very specific to what I'm expected to have the students do in my classes, when we're looking at poetry, we're annotating and analyzing. We are looking for metaphor, symbolism, themes. These are the things that, like, throughout their English high school career, they're taught to look for when they're reading. In general, I always tell them, but also just look for what stands out for you. Like, if you see something and you can't identify it as a metaphor, but you're like, there's something about it, it stands out to you, it resonates with you, then that's something that you should try to like tease out and figure out what it means and why it's significant. So I'm gonna kind of like work through that process with this example. So we're gonna read through There's No Scar, Only Absence by Sadiq Zukoji. While we do this, I would like for you all to type in the chat if there's anything that stands out to you. It could be metaphors, similes, any other literary devices, but it could also just be like, oh, the phrasing of that is really interesting, or making connections, things like that. So go ahead, feel free to type in the chat things that you notice. After Sahar, I sit on the tail end of our house where birds nest on a lemon tree. A snake bunches its body on a height, while the rest creeps along a branch, niggling its head sluggishly into a nest, and as the yard grows quiet, feasts on newly laid eggs. In my hands, a thread grows into another thread until a blanket grows out of my crochet and rests on my lap. Night, like my blanket, covers what light remains of the day. I reach deep into my throat and say a prayer of the many things that can kill me. Death is not one of them. However, the earth is the snake that will consume me like an egg. I'll live longer than the silence a corpse leaves behind. Nothing of the eggs remains. But as for me, my stories will linger, like a neck bone that can withstand a hangman's noose. Tomorrow, when Mother Bird returns, I'll repeat my wife's mantra. A scar is not a flaw, just a story that sticks to our skin. So I'm seeing some comments. That's wonderful in the chat. Of the many things that can kill me, death is not one of them stands out. A scar is not a flaw. Oh yes, the mantra at the end is beautiful. The blanket, last line is beautiful. Yeah, there's some enjambment there. The stanzas are breaking mid-sentence. That last line really pops, I know. Tomorrow when Mother Bird returns. All right, great. So that's the kind of thing that I'll have my students do. I give them a little bit more time, and then we'll, depending on what the assignment is, sometimes they have to do this independently, but for the sake of this poem, I had us kind of like working together. Okay, so I would bring the students together and we'd kind of talk about what are the things that they identified. So some of them would identify things like the extended metaphor, say like this imagery of the snake feasting on eggs really stood out. The simile, my stories will linger like a neck bone that can withstand a hangman's noose. There's some really strong imagery there with that simile. They may identify some elements of religion, maybe considering or thinking that the snake might be a reference to Adam and Eve. The speaker mentions praying, life and death, the many things that can kill me. Death is not one of them. And corpse, which are some things that you guys identified as well. So I think my students are doing a good job. Okay, so this is very specific to the AP Literature and Composition course. So in our literary analysis, I would give them something like this, which this is a stylized prompt that I created based on Zukoji's poem. So this is pretty much what it looks like when they have to do a literary analysis. It phrases it this way. One of the key things I tell them to look out for and to really think about is this phrase, the speaker's complex understanding of whatever is happening in the poem or the short story. To have to, that's really the challenge of literature, is to understand the complex meaning behind what the poet or the speaker is saying. So I'm just going to read through the prompt. In Sadiq Zukoji's poem, There Is No Scar, Only Absence, published in 2021, the speaker writes about their observations made while sitting outside their home. This information is very vague, so they have to really tease it out. Read the poem carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how Zukoji uses literary elements and techniques to develop the speaker's complex understanding of what they observe. And then they have to use a thesis or claims. They have to provide textual evidence and explain that textual evidence. And here is a student example. I'm not going to read the entire thing. This student really focused on the metaphor of the snake. But one of the things that I want to point out with this is when we're talking about reading literature and my personal goals, and I think a lot of other English teachers that I've talked to and teachers in general, like we want to help develop empathy. And one of the things that poetry does is it helps to highlight the human experience. And that's exactly what this student focuses on. So I wanted to just draw our attention to the last sentence. Through this extended metaphor, Zukoji creates a vivid and powerful portrayal of the human experience, highlighting the fragility of life and the power of human creativity and resilience in the face of adversity. So they get all of that from Zukoji's like really beautiful poem. And to be able to make those connections and then reflect on how it relates to them and speaks to them, I think is one of the things that I am constantly reminding myself about what I'm providing for my students and exposing them to. And hopefully they get some kind of response or thought that looks like this student's here. Okay, so both of my classes focus a lot on analyzing the work of other authors. So they don't really get a lot of opportunities to be creative. In the classroom, those opportunities are really created by me. So I have to intentionally give them opportunities to be creative. So one of the things that I really enjoyed is giving them something like the ghazal. And Sahar is going to be talking more about this, especially like with the structure. But ghazals are a form of lyric poetry born in medieval Arabia. These are pre-Islamic, like the 7th century. And then they spread throughout Persia and Ottoman courts and were adapted by Muslim cultures. There's a rhyming refrain that happened throughout the poem that you'll kind of see as we go. They have elements of melancholy, loss, love, separation, longing, metaphysical questions, which are really fun to get the students to tease out and think about. We today are going to be focusing on a work by Hafez, who is a master of the ghazal from the 14th century, and a more modern poet, Aga Shahid Ali, who we say biggest champions, but also helped kind of like spread the ghazal to English and modern audiences, or at least for my perspective, I guess. Okay, so what I like to lead the students through before actually getting to creating their own ghazal is they have to really understand the form of a ghazal and like some of the features, just like we would do with a sonnet. Like you can't create a sonnet without knowing the rules. So we look at a classic ghazal by Hafez. We look at a few different ones. We'll look at one today. And then I'll show them a variety of modern examples of ghazals. And we'll look at an excerpt from Tonight by Aga Shahid Ali. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go through a quick reading of this. We don't necessarily do an analysis of the classic poem. We kind of talk about them a little bit and tease out some of the things that resonate with us. But the main thing is I want the students to look for the rhyme scheme and the refrain so that they can utilize it in their own writing. Ghazal 84 by Hafiz. Dear wine boy, bring us wine, the fast over. Give us the cup, the well-known Passover. It's time to say prayers we've long forgotten. Thank God the break from wine at last over. Intoxicate me so I will forget those I've known well and those I've passed over. We watch the scent of what's inside the cup. We send in thanks our deepest prayers over. From the dead heart, new life had reached the soul. From the soft breeze, your perfume passed over. The prideful ascetic followed danger. The path to a safe life's been passed over. I spent all my heart's currency on wine. My counterfeit coins have been passed over. How long can one repent in such turmoil? Pour wine, at last the madness is over. Don't try to lead Hafez down the hard path. He's discovered wine, the hard path's over. One of the things that I point out to the students, we can go to the next slide, is that this is a translation into English. So the translator really was making an effort to keep the rhyme scheme and the refrain that's there. So they did a really good job with that, but then you see something like madness is over, and then it kind of changes it a little bit. And then we also see the reference of the poet in the poem.
I'm so sorry, Danielle. Pardon me about that.
Okay, so the next poem that we're looking at is Tonight by Ali. And so I just wanted to do an excerpt because I want to be aware of time, but this is really beautiful, and Sahar is going to be sharing another poem, other poems by Aga Shahid Ali, that's my understanding. So I just want to read through this excerpt. Where are you now, who lies beneath your spell tonight? Whom else from rapture's road will you expel tonight? Those fabrics of cashmere to make me beautiful, trinket to gem, me to adorn, how tell tonight? I beg for haven, prisons let open your gates. A refugee from belief seeks a cell tonight. And I, Shahid, only am escaped to tell thee, God sobs in my arms, call me Ishmael tonight. It's a very beautiful poem. I encourage you to read the rest of it. Okay, so go ahead and go to the next slide. So once we go through this process of really understanding kind of the rules of a ghazal, I'll have the students get into small groups. And the small groups consist of no more than 3 students. So if you were to do this, again, I encourage you, not more than 3 students. I know our students, a lot of them will try to advocate for that 4th member, like, please, can they join us? I tell them split it into pairs of 2. You cannot do 4. It makes the poem just way too long. It also complicates the repetition of the rhyme schemes. Not that it's impossible, but ghazals are usually not more than like 15 lines anyway. So it just becomes too long and too much if you have more than 3 people in the group. So they're in groups of 2 to 3. They create the first couplet together that creates the rhyme scheme or the refrain. And then I give them 4 strips of paper, and they each have to write 4 couplets. And then they come together again as a group, and they paste their stanzas or their couplets together in a way that makes sense to them or the way that they like and, feels good to them. And then they make a final stanza with their name. So we saw how like Ghalib and Hafez and Shahid, like they all included their name in some way. So I tell them it could be literally like a mesh up of their names, or it could be, like maybe they're referencing themselves in some way. So they say like the students or the athletes, like somehow they're like including themselves into the poem. And so here are some examples. This is, here we have a group of young ladies that are developing their ghazal. And you can see that they've got like their strips of paper in front of them. They've got a rhyming dictionary opened up on the iPad so that they can, really get creative with their rhymes, which they really did. So I'm just gonna read a little piece of their work. I know it's a little hard to see. The moon cherishes her stars so bright and bold, each one a jewel in her celestial hold. In the darkness of the night, they shine like gold, a sight to behold so pure and old, under the moon's sessile hold. The planets circle the universe in their royal hold, for not even the brightest star was capable of resisting her loyal hold. She watches over them with a mother's care, guiding their paths with existential hold. So one of the things that we talk about that's interesting and engaging about the refrain and the repetition and the rhyme is that sometimes you have something like this where the adjectives are creating new meaning with every repeated word or phrase. So we have stuff like peaceful hold, loyal hold, existential hold, but there's also a lethal hold, right? So it's interesting how they were able to create like new meaning with every stanza. Here are some more students working on poems. We have on the right, these students are working on their couplets. And then on the left, we have some students that are actually piecing the couplets together. And then here's some more students working on developing theirs. I really wanted to share this one because a lot of students resonated with what these 2 young ladies created. So again, I'm actually gonna read through this entire poem that they created, and you'll kind of see kind of immediately why this might have resonated with some of the other students. So they say, so much work to do at school tomorrow. Feel like I'm going to be a tool tomorrow. Studying late all day and night, exhaustion makes a fool tomorrow. Struggling, writing, failing, flunking. I'll be drowning in a pool tomorrow. Late nights, long fights, still got to act cool tomorrow. Trapped inside the building all day, I'll be working like a mule tomorrow. Plans canceled to the endless ring. Honey, school's tomorrow. Sitting at a desk working the day away. I'll be sitting on a stool tomorrow. Homework till the midnight hour. Free time rarer than jewels tomorrow. Racing from class to class, I'll be spinning like a spool tomorrow. Us students don't have it easy, burdened with strict rules tomorrow. So I particularly resonate with the free time is rarer than jewels tomorrow. I think daily I have at least one student ask me if they can have free time, and we don't have free time. There's so much to do tomorrow, too much to do today. Okay, so they end their group work with a gallery walk. So we put up all of the ghazals around the classroom, and then I have them I instruct them to look at anywhere between like 3 to 5 of the ghazals that have been created. So they get a variety. And of course, our students are unique. So some of them create some that are really funny. Some of them create some that are kind of sad, but there's like there is a wealth of different perspectives. Some of them like kind of switch between because we have different writers. So it's just like a really fun activity and they enjoy it. These kids were like they were looking at one of their friends' ghazals and really enjoying it. So then I asked them to sit down. I give them a hot sheet of paper and they do a little reflection. So they reflect on their experience of writing the ghazal, and then they pick a poem that really stood out to them or resonated with them, and then they kind of reflect on that one. In general, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what they're saying here. Most of the students said that it was much more challenging than they expected because they had to think of these rhymes. They had to have the refrain that was repeated, and somehow like making those phrases was much more challenging than they expected. So I think it really develops like a respect for what these poets are doing. And then I wanted to share the next student response. So this student, again, is like reflecting on like, it was a fun experience. It was really challenging to kind of like brainstorm and think about these couplets and how to arrange them. But then they reflected on the School Tomorrow poem. Reading the ghazal that begins with school tomorrow until tomorrow was a unique experience. The topic of school stress and worry was relatable. The poem flowed well and the rhymes were well picked for each couplet. It could improve if they included a couplet regarding interactions with teachers. While they mention several aspects of school, they vaguely repeat a few. So one of the things that I just love about this is that acknowledgement about how relatable something that one of their classmates wrote, right? So we're again developing empathy, seeing ourselves in other people's stories and experiences, and just like, I can relate to that, but also being able to go like, but something's missing. Like I probably would have included the teachers in that experience and stuff like that. So just like a really fun activity, but also getting them to think in ways that they're not really used to thinking, having to come together. Andrea was talking about how we're coming out of COVID and distance learning. So all of these opportunities where they like work together, I really value them and try to fit them in as much as possible. And that is the end for me. Thank you, everyone.
Wow, thank you so much, Danielle. That was wonderful. That's ghazal about school. The students were getting a lot of love in the chat as well. Thank you both so much for sharing. We're now open for questions. I was going to kick it off with a couple of questions, but noting the time, I think it's probably more valuable for you to ask questions. So we can take a couple questions from you all, and then hopefully we'll have time to make a ghazal together. And you're welcome to drop it in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute. Getting a lot of comments in the chat about just noting that these projects are incredible, so well structured with profound results. Indeed, I mean, as someone, at City Lore, we work with teaching artists in the schools, and it's one thing to be a teaching artist and you get all this like creative leeway, but I think what I'm so inspired by what you're doing as classroom educators, because I know you're oftentimes bound by standards and the curriculum and so forth, but what you were both able to do with your students is just extraordinary. Okay, here's a question. Madeline Cohen asks, did any of your students share some specific changes of attitude about Islam as a result of the projects? And that's open to either of you.
I can't say that they had any changing of their attitudes. Part of that is because when we were going over our poetry unit, it's not so much a focus on Islam or Muslim culture. It's really, here is this type of poetry, here is this specific poet that I think is interesting and is engaging and I think can really challenge you. So not so much a change of heart on Islam, but I think like there's little things that I incorporate that I think change the thinking. Like one of the things that we talked about with the City Lore summer program, Reverence for Words, is that like Muslim and Islamic inspired, you know how we kind of were thinking of that. These works have inherent value. So when I present it to them, it's not like, oh, here's these Muslim writers because you need to, like, I give an explanation for that. So it kind of is like naturally now you're exposed to it and it's a part of your awareness. Just like when I taught the Odyssey, I didn't give like huge explanations for why we were doing the Odyssey. But now it's a part of their knowledge and they can say, oh, I read that. I've been exposed to that. So I think it changed them, but I don't think they know how much it did. Maybe.
That's a great question. I would say yes in my class. That was the goal that I set out to accomplish, and I would say it was accomplished. But in small ways, with Muslim students saying, "Oh, I didn't know that." I think there is a perception that Muslims are extremely devout, extremely knowledgeable about the religion. So I saw in the chat about the religious dress, and I don't know. I have the page right here with the kafia, but it occurs to me we might have mislabeled things. We, including Abdullah, who shared about his own experience, because he's certainly not an expert. So I think just the notion that it means so many different things to be a Muslim really came across, and they really responded to that. But again, for so many of my students who I know identify as Muslim, to say, oh, I didn't know anything about that, it was like, yes, the goal was accomplished. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm getting another question. And Petra, we have a question here about you're a teaching artist and interested in collaboration. Please do reach out to me if you're based in New York City and want to collaborate with other teaching artists, specifically serving Muslim majority classrooms. Another question from Noor. I mentioned a type of Islamic slam poetry. Can you mention what that's called again? Yeah, so I'm going to put it in the chat, Beit Bazi, that's one spelling of it, or Beit Bazi. And the way that works is usually you have two competing teams, and they're made up of poets. And and this is again in the South Asian context. So the members on the teams are full of a repertoire of classical poetry. And you start with a letter. They're judges. This is a judged competition. And the judges give you a letter of the alphabet. And you have one person from your team will start and recite a poem beginning with that letter or with that sound. And then whatever sound they end on, the opposing team, a member from that team, will then respond with a poem beginning with that last sound. And then you go back and forth until one is stumped, or basically, I think, traditionally it works differently in different contexts in the region, but that's how it works. But in our context, and unfortunately in the North American lack of poetry repertoire in our brains, not everyone, but it's not as common to have those kinds of things memorized. What we did in this institute is we had opposing teams, and then we just used song lyrics, which people have memorized. So, somebody would start out with like whatever Whitney Houston song, or, whatever lyric they ended on, that last letter of that lyric would then be the opening for the opposing team to respond. So you can do it that way. You could also do it as individuals. You could even use it for other subjects. It doesn't have to be poetry. You could do it in your science class if you're trying to maybe teach the elements table. I don't know. So I'm just going to jump. Let's see. Exposure to art from various cultures. Okay, great. I think I'm just going to look at the last topic comment here. This was a great Zoom meeting. I'm wondering how the response and feedback differed when a student is presenting as opposed to a teacher. My daughter created her own exhibit about Ramadan and African culture, and the students really responded and followed up with many questions. And that's from Nzinga, if I said that your name right. So how it differed when a student is presenting versus a teacher. And then I might make that the last question, because we do have one last activity to conclude with.
I would be happy to answer that in Zinga's question, just because that comes up so much in my class. I am in a public high school space and have to really walk a fine line of the academic study of religion versus trying to encourage anyone to become a member of a particular religion. So all of that being said, I am not comfortable maybe having my own presentation about my own faith background, but I encourage lots of student presentations about their faith backgrounds. When I first was approached to teach world religions, I felt very uncomfortable thinking about what I do represent religiously, and then also the challenge of what I don't represent religiously, and wanting to really love and embrace and respect those religions. I approach history with such a critical eye as a teacher, and I approach religion with just such a loving and joyful space. It's a really fun way to teach. So that is my long response for saying, I think students really respond well to other students, especially about religion and difference, and learning in that more formal way. We have had teacher presentations in the past. Teachers come in and speak about their bar or bat mitzvah, or about Easter what it means to them. But I do think it's something that teachers need to be very aware of. So really naming and being very specific about the religions that they're teaching. I hope that addresses that question.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions and your responses, your shares, and also thank you for all the shares in the chat of resources and what's resonating for you all. Really appreciate it. And I think that please do share any links you want everyone to know about. And I think we also had some that we wanted to share, including about the multisensory interview. And I think, Andrea, you already shared the Metropolitan resource. So if this is okay, then we'll take the last, now we have about 15 minutes. I'm going to go over just a few minutes. And if you need to leave, we thank you for staying with us, but you're welcome to peel off. And I hope something stuck with you. So we're going to shift gears into our own poetry making now. So, un moment, just, okay. So let's jump back into the ghazal. And what we're going to do now is, I'm going to blow through this a little fast because I want us to write, basically. But we are returning to a wonderful poet, Agha Shahid Ali, who passed away prematurely in 2001 in Massachusetts. He's a Kashmiri poet, and actually also of Afghan heritage, like me. Okay, so we're gonna read another poem of his called Ghazal, and I'm just gonna ask you all. This is going to inspire our own poem making. So as you listen, please think of a shape that comes to mind when you listen to this poem, and not in terms of the content, but in terms of the flow, the sound. What shape comes to mind? Okay, Ghazal. Feel the patient's heart pounding. Oh, please, this once. James Merrill. I'll do what I must if I'm bold in real time. A refugee, I'll be paroled in real time. Cool evidence clawed off like shirts of hellfire. A former existence untold in real time. The one you would choose, were you led then by him? What longing, oh Yar, is controlled in real time? Each syllable sucked under waves of our earth. The funeral love comes to hold in real time. They left him alive so that he could be lonely. The God of small things is not consoled in real time. Please afterwards empty my pockets of keys. It's hell in the city of gold in real time. God's angels again are, for Satan, forlorn. Salvation was bought, but sin sold in real time. And who is the terrorist? Who the victim? We'll know if the country is polled in real time. Behind a door marked danger are being unwound. The prayers my friend had enscrolled in real time. The throat of the rear view and sliding down it, the street of farewells now unrolled in real time. I heard the incessant dissolving of silk. I felt my heart growing so old in real time. Her heart must be ash where her body lies burned. What hope lets your hands rake the cold in real time? Now, friend, the beloved has stolen your words. Read slowly. The plot will unfold in real time. For Donald Hall. Okay, so what shapes come to mind? I see here shapes of grids in a car tire. Love that. Never got that one before. That's great. That's a poem. Hexagon turning. Ah, okay. So shape of a flame, a carpet being unfurled. Love that. These are so great. Undulating waves punctuated with sharp peaks, a funnel, a long road. Okay, seeing a lot of like something unfurling, something sort of opening. It's like mirrors facing each other, a tunnel, something long. Well, interestingly enough, I think you're getting, yeah, jagged lines, shapes like flames. So although they're written in a distinct way, Shahid wrote the ghazal in a classical way, which is that the couplets are actually independent couplets. And that is one of the main features and what I think makes the ghazal so radical and so liberatory and so subversive, really, is that they are independent. So did you see we moved from thing to thing, almost like branch to branch, right? Sometimes they didn't even have, one couplet didn't have much to do with the previous couplet. And by couplet, I just want to define, we're talking about each 2-line stanza, that's a couplet. So there's no enjambment between them. They don't go from the one to the other. The name of the poem is called Ghazal. Maybe someone can just type that in the chat, sorry. So here, and in that stanza, or here moving between these two couplets, who is the terrorist and who the victim will know if the country is polled in real time. We're going from this large, sort of national, global, even like this large question, this, to something suddenly we're going to a door marked with danger. This could also be maybe related to some of the themes before it, but not necessarily. Now we encounter prayers by a friend. So we're moving space, we're moving scale, because these were written independently. And the shape that Agha Shahid Ali likens ghazals to often is the shape of pearls on a string, that they actually are sort of, each unique pearl is on its own. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through another example of this, but Sahar Romani wrote a beautiful ghazal here. This is an excerpt called Urdu. But so the first feature is that they are independent. They are independent couplets, and that drove English language poets. Really, it just drove them, it challenged them, I should say, because we're so used to in I would say mainstream writing that it should be sort of linear, that things connect to each other. So that's the first way I think the ghazal is a little subversive. The second thing is that second feature of the ghazal is that it's highly rhythmic. And Danielle beautifully went a little bit into this structure, right? We have the refrain that repeats, and the refrain that repeats in this ghazal is in real time. And it's set up in the first stanza. So you have it in both lines, and then in each subsequent stanza, it's only in the second line. And then what you have before that refrain, which is called the radif, you have the qafiyah. The qafiyah is the rhyme. So the rhyme pattern here is the old sound, right? Bold, paroled. And then in the second stanza, it's just in the second line here, untold. So that gives it the element of flow that maybe a lot of you were noticing, right? Like we're moved forward on this river of rhythm, really. And in English, sometimes rhyme poetry can sound sing-songy, but as you saw in some of the student work today, it can also sound extraordinary, right? So we shouldn't shy away from rhyme. And this, again, because of time, we don't have, we can't get into this stunning poem called Hip Hop Ghazal by Patricia Smith. But if you want to look at a highly rhythmic ghazal, I'll just read these 2 lines because we have to, they're just so extraordinary. But so Patricia writes, gotta love us brown girls, munching on fat, swinging, sorry, the Zoom is in the way. Gotta love us brown girls, munching on fat, swinging blue hips, decked out in shells and splashes. Lottie, bring them woo hips. As the jukebox teases, watch my sister's throat the heartbeat, inhaling baseline, cracking backbone, and singing through hips. So she just uses a single word, hips, as her refrain, and then does awesome things with the rhyme, woo, through, right? Like once you know the structure, you can do anything. You can bend it, you can go rogue, you can break it. And then in the final stanza, of course, we, as mentioned, you refer to yourself. But for the sake of time, let us just get to writing and sharing our own ghazal. So I invite everyone to maybe just take 2 minutes and write a couplet in which you use the radif or refrain in real time at the end, and then you incorporate the rhyme old just before that refrain. And if you do and you're done, once you're done, please type it in the chat if you'd like to share it. But otherwise, yeah, you can also keep it for yourself. But what we're going to actually do is we're going to create a quick Zoom room ghazal, a group ghazal. So let's just take 2 minutes and nope, just have fun, no pressure, no number of words. All you need to do, there's no other constraint. The only constraint is to use the refrain in real time and to incorporate a rhyme. So you're just writing 1 couplet or 2 lines. And it could be about any topic. Perhaps it might be about our presentation. That would be, maybe that's the roundtable would like that, but reflection on but you're not bound. Mm. Okay, just take another minute if you can. Thank you, Andrea. I know you have to head out. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I'll catch you.
Thank you so much. What an honor. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so let's see what we got. Oh, there's some beautiful and very hearty ones. I love that we're opening the valves. Okay, so what we're gonna do is traditionally in some contexts, like in mushairas, which are a type of poetry gathering in South Asia, ghazals, and this is another subversive quality of them, they are meant to be done communally, right? Like we're making it here, we're doing it. But what is cool about it is because we all are using the same refrain, the audience anticipates, they know what the line is going to end with. So the audience joins in the poetry sharing, in the recitation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read the lines that you've contributed, but then I would invite everyone to unmute. I know this is going to be totally cacophonous, but that's awesome. Everyone is going to together say sorry, don't unmute yet. Sorry, 1 second. Everyone is going to together say the refrain together. So for example, I'm just going to start like with this is just an example. So I wrote, I am so elated by learning in real time. I thank you, teachers, for being bold in real time. And then as I was saying it, you would unmute and you would say everyone would say together the in real time part. Does that make sense? We would say that together in real time. So each time we hear in real time, we say in real time together. That's the way it works in Mushairas, which we are now doing. Okay, so this is our last few minutes. Let me just find the start of our, okay, everyone ready? Let me just find the first one. Okay. Sorry, okay. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start with Bryn. Okay, so when you hear in real time, please say it with me. Okay. Once turned, once spun, once born, I love to love this body, bold, in real time. I got to keep moving, producing, don't want to grow mold.
In real time.
I write in the chat, reaching for a hand. My words spill from the can like tea on the floor, but I've spoken with finger and I was here. That is my alibi. I listen loudly to hear the quiet. I'm sold in real time. Trying to live now in real time. Young heart swelling, unfurled with storytelling, empathy for us to behold in real time. Trying to live now in real time. Dreaming of the past, can't hold on in real time. Gold reevaluation, re-evolution, times ahead.
In real time.
Pamela, turning it over. In real time, you touched my heart. Song sung of old, some not sold. Is it right? I'm not sure, but it sure is gold. Sink down in it, into the fold unfurled, story untold.
In real time.
Learning and exploring and writing notes.
In real time.
Blanket on my lap against the cold.
In real
time.
Watching news, cold, bold, not all yet told. I'm unruly, kind of scared, all pulled.
In real
time.
All right. Wait, oh, sorry, last one. Dates in my mouth, draped in soft silk, shades of gray and gold. It's iftar, and the azan sounds softly over my phone. Walking toward my prayer rug, purple plush, soft texture, message by massage my toes. Looking down at the qibla, bold patterns of silver and gold. Allahu Akbar, I say from my soul. In real time. Bravo, bravo. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Yeah, snaps, everyone. And we will try to, yes, we can share that chat or get a copy of it, perhaps, Kinsey. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, folks. I just want to say thank you so much to our amazing presenters today. Sahar, thank you so much for being here. And Danielle and Andrea, who unfortunately had to go. This was just a beautiful way to start the morning. So wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And I promise to all of you attendees, I will send you a link to this recording as well as to the chat. Oh, there's Danielle. Hey. As well as to the chat and any other resources. I had shared some resources, so I will email those as well. Thank you for staying on a few extra minutes. A big thank you to our ASL interpreters as well. So grateful for you both. And I just want to invite everyone to join us this afternoon. Face-to-Face continues today at 4 p.m. with celebrating the creation of culturally responsive practices in education spaces. I hope you can be there. And I'm just putting the full schedule in the chat for everyone to take a look at. Have a lovely rest of your Wednesday, and thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Danielle. Thanks, Kinsey, Alex, Maria, and Hitra. Happy Ramadan, everyone.
Thank you.